Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm happy for you to get to know today Caitlin Rose. Welcome, Caitlin. Glad you're here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really,
Y-
really excited to be here with you.
Yes. And so we're going to dive into talking about neuroscience and trauma, which I know is a topic that's interesting to most of us that are in the therapy world. But Caitlin, as I start with everyone, why don't you tell folks a little bit more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed?
Yeah, thank you. Uh, Gosh, when I get this question, you always wonder how far back should I go? Uh, I can, well, I'll start with where I'm at and then we'll retrace a little bit. So,
Good.
um, I my company is Build Resilience, and we help therapists to get unstuck, both personally as well as with their clients, by providing a deep foundation of nervous system regulation. And I'm certified as a performance neuroscience certified coach, which is a whole big mouthful, which basically just means, I've really spent a lot of time deeply understanding the neuroscience, the science behind how our brain and nervous system work and how to work with our brain and nervous system instead of fighting it. And I really started on this journey going way back. I began as a yoga teacher and was really immediately interested in bringing yoga to people who might not, aren't the sort of classic type of person you would think would go to a yoga class. So I was working with homeless populations. I was working with veterans who were dealing with trauma. Um, and I found that a lot of sort of what I had learned wasn't totally accessible to people, but I was really interested in the fundamental principles of what was happening in, what's happening? Like, why do we like yoga? Why do we gravitate towards these different somatic strategies? When they're working, why are they working? And how do we make that more accessible and available to people who maybe don't have an hour and a half to get on a yoga mat? Um, and also, when they don't work, why don't they work? And that was
Mhm.
just as interesting to me because I did see a lot of interventions just not connecting. And I also saw that in my own life. So I reached a point where I have a, intense trauma history and, was dealing with complex PTSD myself, which is a lot of, as many of us, I'm sure a lot of people can, relate to that.
Mhm.
A lot of times it's our own history, our own experience that really brings us to the work and makes us kind of like personally and professionally obsessed with untangling some of these more difficult questions. And so I got to a place where I couldn't even really use a lot of the strategies that I was teaching.
Mhm.
I was sitting with myself with major panic attacks and anxiety. And in my head, I'm like, okay, sit there, deep breathe, do, all the things I knew that I had in my toolkit. And I found that at the time I needed help the most, that was the time that all of those tools were the most inaccessible to me. And so that was a real puzzle. At first I got really, really
Mhm.
frustrated by that and sort of went through all that roller coaster of feelings that since then I've heard from so many clients. Maybe I'm just broken. Maybe I'm just lazy. I'm the only person in the universe who feels this way. Uh, and then finally, I think because I had enough of an education to understand some of what might be going on in the nervous system, I got really curious and I
Mhm.
really started to just wonder, well, why is that? That doesn't make sense. If these are supposed to be breathing exercises and somatic exercises and poses that are supposed to calm me down, but at the time that I'm most revved up and most triggered, that's the time I'm least able to take advantage of them. That seems odd. And there
Right,
must
right,
be what's going on there. And so that was kind of the beginning of this very long, 10 or 15-year journey now, and coming out the other side and really, having a coherent explanation that I can offer to clients.
right. I know there was in some of the stuff that you gave to me when in preparing for this episode, and there was a topic that you had mentioned, which I think this might be a good segue for you to say more about because it's gotten me really curious as well. Is the
Mhm.
difference between nervous system regulation and nervous system capacity? And I thought
Yeah.
that is just, I just think about people that have experienced trauma, especially extreme trauma. They feel overwhelmed all the time. And
Hmm.
so, just I'm just curious about that as far as the capacity. And so, yeah, so tell us what you've learned.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a great. I'm glad you brought that up. That's a great. Really, just picks up exactly like where I was saying. What is There's a puzzle here, and what is that puzzle? Why is it not connecting? And it is in the difference between nervous system regulation and nervous system capacity. So, I've been doing this 10 or 15 years. In that, when I started, a lot of these topics were still pretty niche. And I think in that time, more and more, there's been, I see, topics about vagal, the vagus nerve exercises, polyvagal theory, nervous system regulation. It's starting to kind of filter into the popular consciousness and more into the world of therapy. Um, and so there's, an instinct of like, okay, we're starting to figure out that nervous system regulation is really important as a foundation for mental and emotional well-being. That we need to get grounded, we need to get resourced, we need to pay attention to what's going on in our nervous system, and how our heart, what's going on with our heart rate, what's going on with our breathing. That's all really a really, really good awareness. But where it falls apart is sometimes we're focused on, we're like, oh, I have all these tools and I need to help this person get regulated, or I need to help myself get regulated. But if we're not aware of what our actual capacity is, then we can be applying a tool that isn't really accessible, and it doesn't actually achieve the result. So that was what
Hmm.
was happening with me, is I had all these tools where I was like, oh, deep breathing is a regulating thing. So if I'm freaked out and panicking, I should do that. And it wasn't regulating to me at all,
Hmm.
because I wasn't really appreciating my personal nervous system capacity. So, nervous system regulation is the act of getting within let's say, our window of tolerance, right? So
Hmm.
if our window of tolerance, we can define that as, this is the ability of my nervous system. How much energy and information can my nervous system tolerate right now, right? It can
Right.
tolerate a lot, it can tolerate a little. The act of getting regulated is getting within my window of tolerance. But
Right.
that's going to look very different if my capacity is here or my capacity is here. It's
Hmm.
really difficult to get regulated within a very narrow window. And that's where a lot of
Hmm.
the struggle comes, is we're trying to get regulated where we might be better served first expanding that window,
Wow.
and then
Yeah.
working on getting regulated within that. And there's so much kind of grief that happens in that struggle to get regulated.
Hmm.
uh, and rather than just appreciating, well, yeah, what's the window and how do we grow that window? And that's been the biggest gap that we've sought to fill, is just tackling that question: how do you build your window of tolerance so
Right.
that it becomes easier and easier to serve?
Yes. Yes. So now I'm really curious. What are the ways in which you build that window of tolerance?
Yeah. So there's a couple ways to approach this, and one is just like purely physiologically. Um, and I do want to talk about that because I think those nuts and bolts are really important. The other is just sort of some general principles of understanding how to collaborate with the nervous system. So in general, you want to make sure you're meeting the nervous system where it's at. This is a big kind of just principle that I try to hew to and really pass off to the practitioners that I work with. We're not smarter than the nervous system. We're not stronger than the nervous system. The nervous system is the system that we have it's an exquisitely fine-tuned machine for managing our energy, our emotions, our experiences. And if it's doing something, it's doing it for a good reason. So, very often, lacking a real fundamental understanding of what it's doing and why, often we end up sort of in this pitched battle with the nervous system,
Right.
expecting it, like open up, or give me the capacity to reflect or, or something or feel. And if it's not doing that, then there's always a good reason. And so it's really about entering into a collaborative relationship and taking it on ourselves to really understand the mechanics of how this exquisitely fine-tuned machine was built and how it's meant to
Hmm.
operate and what it's doing. Um, so meeting it where it's at first of all is how we got to go in to go out, right? Really get
Hmm.
curious about, okay, so like for example, I'm going to share a quick story. When I first sort of figured out this as a working paradigm and I got curious about my own window of tolerance, I had an expectation that my tolerance was probably pretty broad because I'd been doing this work. I was a yoga teacher. I knew all these things. I'd been, I was very like educated about this stuff. So I sort of had just this unconscious assumption, oh, yeah, I'm sure it's quite broad. And I went into this exercise around just being very honest about what I could tolerate in the moment without distancing or dissociating myself. And as soon as I engaged, it was a somatic exercise. As soon as I engaged with it, I noticed myself just take off, just like
Yeah.
check out mentally. And it was such a sudden it was like just this abrupt, wake up call, um, and really frustrating on some levels because I had to really face up to how narrow that band was that I was working with, but also then deeply really satisfying to realize, oh, I can work from here. I
Hmm.
kept trying to work from out here and nothing was really connecting because I wasn't able to really be honest about what was happening in my nervous
Uh-huh.
system. But as soon as I could get honest, it was confronting. But then I really started to see actual change happen because I was meeting my nervous system where it was at. So that's just the getting at some of the kind of the way of orienting to this. But the real nuts and bolts of it, we uh, I really got deeply into the neurophysiology of nervous system capacity during COVID, actually, because I had a
Sure.
lot of, I just this wave of clients coming to me. I'd moved online. Previously, I'd been all offline group workshops. I was teaching, doing workshops at colleges, and all that stopped. And then everything was online. And I had this wave of people coming to me in this acute state of panic and anxiety. Um, and I was hitting a lot of these same questions that I'd had for years. I'm not in the room with them. I'm trying to figure out how to reach them. They're just in this spiral. How do I get through? And we really, I went back to my basics and I just started doing as many assessments as I could. And I had a lot of people coming in. So I had a really pretty broad data set. And I started doing this assessment of, mental and emotional symptoms, but then also their physiology. What was going on with their breathing? What was going on with their blood chemistry? And giving them simple at-home tests that they could do. And what I started to see, this pattern, was their vagal tone was really low. Their CO2 tolerance, their tolerance for carbon dioxide in their bloodstream was really low. And their vascular, or I won't say capacity, vascular flexibility was really low, meaning they're just chronically tense. So and chronically um, holding this chronic tension in their veins and arteries.
Hmm.
Uh, and so we just started to work directly with those capacities. So, we did a little bit of psychoeducation to give them a little bit of context and some reason to invest their time and energy in this. And then we just started working with exercises to strengthen vagal tone, increase CO2 tolerance, and increase vascular flexibility. Technically, it's called vascular compliance. And it was the transformations were profound.
Yeah.
Really kind of blew me away. I mean, I knew all this stuff worked, but just being really disciplined about just doing that and seeing how many other things just cleared up was pretty incredible and has really laid the foundation for
Right.
all the work that I do until today.
Yeah. Yeah. So with those three things, what would be what's the modality for working with those things? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways you can come at it. And again, deciding on the particular intervention is going to go back to that basic principle of understanding where this person, where their nervous system is at. So this is where I lean, because different strategies are going to be more or less activating.
Mm-hmm.
And so the trick is to find an intervention that, that gives them the most leverage in terms of, really gives them a chance to intervene and shift something in their physiology while still being tolerable in terms of how activating it is to their
Mm-hmm.
nervous system. So this is where I really lean on polyvagal theory and, Stephen Porges's the model of the ladder of engagement, of understanding. I don't know how, this is sort of gaining traction, but I never want to assume that people have a familiarity.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, I think there'll be people that are very familiar with it, and then,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, will want to know more.
yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
It really, so I mean, the ladder of engagement is basically just describing the stages of our stress response. And it's a hierarchical model, and so it's understanding, at the top, when we're at the top of the ladder, we're in a mode of our stress response that's fundamentally social. Sometimes we're not used to thinking of that as part of our stress response, but it absolutely is. Our first instinct in dealing with stress is, can I reach out and find someone to help me? Can I talk it through? Can I, what can I do relationally to mediate the stress? So
Mm-hmm.
that's like the top of the ladder. When or if that's inaccessible to us, there's nobody to help for whatever reason, we try to reach out, we're rebuffed or whatever, we descend down the ladder into fight or flight. And that's what we most commonly associate with as our stress response.
Right.
So fight or flight is I'm gonna fight back, I'm gonna run away, right? And I've got to mobilize a lot of internal energy and resource to do that, to take those actions. That's most people, when they're coming in and they're presenting with symptoms of panic, anxiety, or a whole range of, just disorders and dysfunction, like something's not connecting. It's not so much about fight or flight. It's really rooted in a disruption in fight or flight, an inability to complete the fight or flight cycle. There's nothing wrong with fight or flight. So I think sometimes it gets demonized, right? It's a very
Right.
necessary part of our physiology.
Right. Right.
But what happens is, for one reason or another, our ability to complete that instinct to protect ourselves, to fight back, or to run away is interrupted. And then that energy stays stuck in our nervous system. And it's held indefinitely. There's no time-bound mechanism by which that energy dissipates. We need to go back and release it, renegotiate it, complete it, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
what happens when we are carrying this really high level of activation, could be from a acute stressor, acute trauma, or a chronic stressor, a chronic trauma, over time, it's not sustainable for our nervous system to be in that state of activation. And so we adapt by moving further down the ladder into states of freeze and then collapse, or dissociation. And it's just a way of protecting ourselves internally from those intolerable feelings of chronic activation. So when we're in that state of freeze or collapse, that's where we end up finding, like, I need to relax, but I can't relax. Relaxing makes me nervous. I want to
Mm-hmm.
do all these things, but if I try to sit and deep breathe, all those stuck feelings come up and I don't know how to
Mm-hmm.
renegotiate them. And so that really is the art and the science. And it's something, I mean, that is what we take, like that's the program that we guide practitioners through over several months, is how do you, first of all, understand your own internal environment, uh,
Mm-hmm.
gain both a cognitive and an intuitive understanding of your client's internal environment, communicate to them, give them the frameworks and the vocabulary to assess where they're at, and
Mm-hmm.
then take this suite of tools. Okay, here's, this body of tools that can potentially help with vagal tone, can potentially help with CO2. And let's find what's a match for your nervous
Mm-hmm.
system.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
I think for me, a big part of my message to people is like, it's not just a check the box, one size fits all. It's really about befriending the nervous system and understanding we don't have to sit there and throw spaghetti at a wall. Like there are clear
Mm-hmm.
principles and frameworks to figure out what works and what doesn't work. But it's really about partnering with respecting our nervous system and where it's at and meeting it where it's at.
Right. Right. Can you give just a few examples, maybe of the specifics around um, just say, for example, the CO2 capacity?
Yeah.
Um, what would be some of the interventions there?
Yeah. So building CO2 capacity is really about gradually, so softening our breath and gradually lessening um, the oxygen that we're taking in relative to the uh, CO2. So a lot of times we think of, okay, I need like to relax, I need a big, long, deep breath. But actually, what we're doing in building CO2 tolerance is we're allowing we're not forcefully exhaling as much, and we're allowing the CO2 to gradually build up in our brain, so or in our bloodstream. So, for example, there's like a breath hold that somebody could do, where you're just you're breathing softly and then intermittently, gently pinching your nostrils. We're
Mm-hmm.
just blocking the air passage. There's another breathing exercise around, like I call it like feather breathing, where you're breathing, nasal breathing so gently that, you imagine like my finger's a feather and I'm going to try to breathe so gently that I don't disturb the feather. Right. And so what that's doing is we're offloading less CO2. It's slowly starting to build up. And if we have a low tolerance, we're going to start just that very simple breathing exercise is likely going to start to feel agitating very quickly.
Yeah.
So that's when just an understanding of the window of tolerance is really important, because it'll feel counterintuitive. It'll feel
Mm.
like, you know,
Yeah.
and clients need a way of kind of giving some context to that internal experience, um, and and just understanding like it's totally like we can break this down as much as we want. We can go as slow as we want. Just understand that that feeling is not, it's not dangerous. It's
Mm-hmm.
just coming up against the limits of your capacity. And as we build your brain's tolerance for CO2, um, you're gonna gradually that's gonna be easier and easier. And then what's also gonna happen is you're gonna notice in your day-to-day life, stressors are more tolerable. Everyday
Mm-hmm.
stressors are more tolerable. And when they can start to kind of put the dots together, and you have those light bulb moments, that is really kind of the glue that makes people come back to exercises that would otherwise be you know kind of boring or hard to remember, or feel like you know it feels agitating, so it doesn't feel like, oh yay, that's I want to sit down and do this.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of what we work with is just that, like, also the science of habit formation. How do you make
Mm-hmm.
something? How do you help somebody really weave something into their day? That was a long answer to your question, but
Oh
does
well,
that
well, it's just fascinating to me, and I was curious too how I think most of the listeners will be familiar with other somatic approaches, like brain spotting or EMDR, those
Yeah.
kinds of things. How does this approach kind of integrate with that or that sort of thing?
Yeah, yeah, I love that question. So the way I always introduce this whole framework is, think of it as a scaffolding. It's not going to replace any modality that you currently use. It's just going to make everything you do easier.
Right.
Because every intervention is happening on the foundation of like your client's nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
We're intervening with the hope to make a change, but that change is always going to happen exponentially, quicker or more easefully if there's a foundation of somatic awareness and regulation.
Hmm.
So for example, with, I think EMDR is a really great example. Uh, EMDR is about basically, it's a methodology for finding and really targeting those stuck energetic charges in the nervous system and processing them.
Right.
And it can be, you know, almost miraculous for a lot of people because it really
Hmm.
is, you're speaking the language of the nervous system, and you are really
Hmm.
going in and just supporting the nervous system in what it's already built to do. And so I think that was part of like Francine Shapiro's real insight, right? She just
Right.
started processing stuff and she wasn't even cognitively aware of what was going on, but
Hmm.
she had the wherewithal to just follow that and be curious about it and kind of find out where it led. So I think that's that's my interpretation of why it can work so well, but it doesn't always work. Sometimes
Hmm.
there's, it's either just not accessible or there's a possibility of a real backlash, a real instability, creating an instability in somebody's system. And when it doesn't work, it's always because you haven't quite met the nervous system where it's at. This is a tool that the nervous
Hmm.
system understands, but this is too much too fast. The container isn't there, the foundation isn't there. And so really, when we're talking about nervous system capacity, another word for that would be a container. We're building the
Hmm.
container. And when you build a robust container, so much more becomes possible with whatever modality you're using.
Right, right. Oh gosh, this is so fascinating. Yeah, and so with I know one of the things that you mentioned, Caitlin, is that you've got a book that you've got out. You want to say more about that?
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to. So, yeah, a couple of months ago, I just really felt inspired to get this down in, really a complete way, because there's a lot of concepts packed in here.
Hmm.
There's also a lot of misconceptions and myths, or just misunderstandings in this area. And so I was having so many conversations with practitioners seeking help, and just in the process of kind of explaining what it is that we do, I really got a download of like how much need there is, and also how much, lack of understanding and lack of education there really is around some of the fundamentals here. So I put what I call like a primer together called Rebuilding the
Hmm.
Nervous System After Trauma. And we really start with, and in a lot of what we've been talking about, kind of catching up on where the conversation, how the conversation has evolved around an understanding of the role of the nervous system in mental health treatment. Doing a little bit of a survey of some of the primary frameworks, concepts that we've inherited, and what's still missing there.
Hmm.
Um, and really introducing this concept of nervous system capacity as to fill that gap and to really explain the question of, when something that should be connecting or working isn't connecting, isn't working, isn't accessible, why not? And it always comes down to nervous system capacity. Um, so that book is, it's really an invitation to therapists to orient in a slightly different way towards their practice and towards their clients in general, to really
Hmm.
elicit agency from clients. And then it's also, it's a history of just a brief, I don't want to make it seem, it's not, I don't want to make it seem like a big intimidating book. It's a brief survey of some of the main concepts, how we got where we are, what's missing. And then we just really dive into the nuts and bolts of like, here's how to do it. And I will caveat that to say, it's an introduction. There really is a whole art and science to this.
Hmm.
And so that's the substance of the work that I do, with practitioners one-on-one, is
Right,
uh, really getting into the nuance of it.
right, right. So I'm assuming you've got some training programs or some ways in which people can get trained in all of this.
Yeah, so I run Foundations of Resilience is the 3-month program that I run with practitioners. And that's something I've been doing. Really, it came out of, initially I was working one-on-one with individuals with panic and anxiety, and still do today, but
Hmm.
really reached a point where I just realized I'm only one person.
Right.
There's a lot of people dealing with
Uh-huh.
Canadian. And the other thing I think that really prompted me was uh, a lot of people that were coming to me had tried therapy and they were burnt out on therapy. And I've been in like I have a deep respect for the practice of therapy. I continue
Hmm.
to work with trauma therapists in my own personal life. Um, but I had to really educate myself. I had to go
Hmm.
out, and I was in a position to do that, to really find, to understand for myself what the modalities are, what the training is, what I need. So I could really advocate for myself. And I found so many people were coming to me, they hadn't been equipped by the culture at large to really understand what therapy is for, how to engage with therapy,
Hmm.
how to find a therapist that can work with you, with what you need. And so they just sort of had this like, well, nothing, I was told to go to therapy. I went to therapy. It didn't work or it made it worse. And now I'm just totally freaked out because I think I'm totally broken.
Hmm.
And I'm working with these people one on one. But I was like, oh my gosh, I really, I just felt this really strong motivation to offer a framework to therapists that they could then offer to their clients to just
Hmm.
overall increase the level of understanding of what we're doing here. what,
Yeah.
what are our goals? How do we know if an intervention is accessible? If it doesn't work, how do we troubleshoot it? How do we have a common vocabulary about the foundation we're building? And then if something isn't connecting, you know, make like we can identify, oh, you need this thing. And that's not what I do, but I can make a referral, but here's what we did together.
Hmm.
Right. And or just being able to really call in the people that need the particular part of the foundation, that a particular practitioner does. So um all that is to say, just over the last couple of years, I really moved into more and more working one-on-one with practitioners, and it's been a real joy
Awesome. Awesome.
to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Caitlin, I've got to be respectful of your time and just all of this, but tell folks where they can reach out to you and website and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, so you can find a free copy of the book on my website, buildresilience360.com/heal trauma. So
Hmm.
yeah, that'll send you to a free copy of the book, and then you can go from there to just find out more about me on my website. I've got yeah, a lot of ways of connecting. So I really look forward to hearing from you,
Right.
and
Yeah.
love to hear your feedback on the book. It's always, I feel like, a dialogue. It's an ongoing dialogue.
Right, right. And we'll have links in the show notes and the show summary for people to access that easily. And Caitlin, I hope that we can talk again here soon. This has just been absolutely fascinating, and I'm just full of questions now just about all of
Oh,
this because it is fascinating. So, but
yeah. Thank
yeah,
you.
so we'll be in touch about maybe getting you back on and doing a part two of this whole conversation.
Yeah, I'd love that. Thank you so much. Just yeah, for your curiosity and enthusiasm for this topic and for
Yes.
creating this format. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, thanks. And thanks, everyone. And be sure and check out Caitlin's things in the show notes and the show summary to find those links. So thanks again, Caitlin.